somehow there is a little bit of schadenfreude in this whole topic this week. Because malice in Brussels is entirely justified if former British Prime Minister Cameron becomes Foreign Secretary in the Sunak government. As I talked about, David Cameron returns from profitable political talk retirement to take over the Foreign Office of His Majesty's government. And there's a lot of clamour about this. The person primarily responsible for the disastrous British politics since the Brexit referendum in 2016 and for the inhumane austerity policy in the years before is returning now. But be careful, because in English there is the beautiful word of poetic justice. And this means the far too often fictional fact that the bad guys believe it can happen at the next point. And that's how you can see it when Brexit Prime Minister number 4, Rishi Sunak, brings the person who caused Brexit into the cabinet. Because now Cameron can eat out the soup he brought to Europe. That's a German proverb directly translated. And that's justified, because Cameron will hardly do a worse job than James Cleverly, who is moving to the Home Office. And Cleverly, instead of the unleashed agitator Suella Braverman, will perhaps bring more pragmatic calm to the Home Office. And that wouldn't be bad. But that doesn't mean peace for Sunak. Because the Prime Minister, who is decried as a flyweight, has other ministers in the fire trail of the Braverman, who has only been banned for the moment. And the next round of the Tory civil war in Great Britain is right upon us. And when a Prime Minister like Rishi Sunak now has to rely on a predecessor while being head of government when selecting his ministers, the word desperate is probably the best way to describe the leading party situation. And how serious things are with the Conservative Party is shown by the fact that Sunak had to create a seat in the House of Lords for his new foreign minister in order to be able to appoint him. All those in the party who consider themselves administrative will find this maneuver a resounding slap in the face. By dismissing Suella Braverman as Home Secretary, Sunak has also made an enemy of the right wing of the party. The impression remains of a government that is dragging itself with the last of its strength towards the foreseeable deselection. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak is selling his reshuffle as a liberation move that he wants to use to suggest leadership a year before the next general election. In reality, this is an act of desperation. Just a few weeks ago, the Conservative Prime Minister tried to present himself as a candidate for change, thereby distancing himself from the 12 years in which his 4 predecessors dominated politics in the kingdom, including 6 years under Cameron. The fact that he's still bringing the former Prime Minister back is an admission that Sunak's reinvention has already failed. And there are survey results to prove this, because the lead of the opposition Labour Party has grown to over 20 percentage points in the past few weeks. Many British just have finished with the Tories, and they do want change. But Cameron's personality is astonishing given his role in Brexit. Prime Minister Sunak is moving the cabinet more towards the centre with the change of ministers, but this could be the start of greater turbulence for the Tories. A few weeks ago, as I mentioned, Prime Minister Party Leader Rishi Sunak stood on stage at the Conservative Party conference. There he promised change, and he wanted to underline that he embodies a new policy. Here, and now this. Sunak is bringing David Cameron back into the cabinet, who was Prime Minister from 2010 to 2016. Cameron called the Brexit referendum even though he had spoken out in favour of the country remaining in the European Union. But the outcome was well known. The majority of British people that voted on the day, contrary to expectations, spoke out in favour of Brexit. Cameron's policies had failed and he resigned. Well, he's experienced but responsible for many problems. And Cameron certainly does not stand for change or for a new beginning. His return to the cabinet is like a bad reminder of times gone by. And now it could be argued that he's an experienced politician coming back into the cabinet. Well, he knows the processes, and as a foreign minister, he should benefit from the fact that he is known worldwide by his future interlocutors. And perhaps he's also someone who can implement a professionalization in the United Kingdom's relation with the European Union. But on the other hand, many of the problems that Great Britain is currently grappling with, the effects of massive austerity policies, Brexit, they can be traced back to Cameron. He may be experienced, but politically, he has made mistakes. With Cameron, Rishi Sunak is realigning the cabinet, though. The government has now clearly moved away from the far-right edge of the political spectrum. Suella Braverman represented extreme positions from asylum policy to internal security in an often populist manner. And they cover up the failure of the state with hatred and the search for someone to blame. Sometimes it's the police, sometimes it's the media, sometimes it's the civilian employees in the ministries who prevented tough reforms, and it's always asylum seekers, of which there are far too many, according to them, that they would come to Britain. Compared to Germany, I just have to laugh about this. But Sunak had to fire her, and she had danced on the Prime Minister's nose, as we would say in German. The radicalization of the former Interior Minister got out of hand, and she accused the police of banning right-wing protests while allowing pro-Palestinian demonstrations. And her statements in a newspaper article were not agreed upon. And she described the protests in London there for a ceasefire and a Palestinian state as hate marches. Because so many homeless people in Great Britain have to spend the night in pedestrian zones, she wanted to limit this and criticized what she saw as a lifestyle choice in the cities to put up a tent. And political derailments have been shown that Sunak could no longer tolerate. And the headwind for Sunak could become stronger by this, because by dismissing Braverman, he also threw the right-wing representative out of the government. And there is a risk that she will now become a martyr and that the headwind for Sunak will become even greater. And what does the party get out of it? Well, a lot of arguing, probably. The Conservatives' course after the next election is completely unclear, and it is possible that the Conservatives are moving even further to the right. And Cameron could also contribute to this, as he is unlikely to get additional votes where Labour was previously elected and the Tories were elected in 2019, the Red Wall, you remember. And the confusion among the Conservatives simply puts many people off. But the unfortunate Brexit gambler is back now. As British Prime Minister in 2016, as I said, David Cameron put everything at risk with the referendum on whether his country should remain in the European Union, the future of his country and also his own as a political leader. And in the end he lost. And Great Britain lost too, and Cameron was history. And today he returns as Foreign Secretary. Cameron has led political Britain as Prime Minister for 6 years, initially as the head of a coalition government with the Liberal Democrats. And since 2015, his Conservative Party has had an absolute majority in the lower house. And on referendum day, he had to say, "I don't think I'm the right captain to steer our country to a new destination." Well, afterwards, Great Britain headed into political chaos with Theresa May, Boris Johnson and Liz Truss. The British still left the EU, and politically Cameron was seen as a cold-blooded player and a tough negotiator. In his private life, he is a family man. He has 3 children with his wife Samantha, son Ivan. The 4th child died severely disabled at the age of 6, unfortunately, before Cameron was elected Prime Minister. And Cameron had devoted himself to caring for his firstborn. Arriving in Downing Street as the successor to the hapless Gordon Brown, the European question was one of the most burning questions for Prime Minister Cameron from the start. It has traditionally divided the British Tories for decades. Margaret Thatcher could not solve it. Her successor, John Major, failed because of her. Cameron tackled it openly also because he believed he could unite his party by doing so. He said, "I was always of the opinion that you have to approach big decisions and not shy away from them." But over time, he had made more and more concessions to his own and extremely Euro-critical wing of the party. And he became increasingly angry about Europe and the alleged weaknesses of the European Union, and demonstratively took a stand in Brussels, often without benefiting his country. But he got some compromises there. But he fell flat on his face with a big fluff then. In 2011, Cameron made a spectacular move at an EU summit in Brussels not to take part in the European Fiscal Pact. At home in London, he sold his behavior as a veto. The EU opponents applauded until they realized that the Fiscal Pact had now been put together without British participation. And when Cameron asked the all-or-nothing question in Brussels in 2016, after what were perceived as half-hearted negotiations, the Prime Minister suddenly mutated into an ardent supporter of the European idea. And his compatriots didn't buy it. Against his stated wishes, the British voters of the day decided to leave the EU. All he had to do was announce his resignation, as he stood in front of Downing Street number 10. When he appeared in front of the cameras along with his wife Samantha, he was close to tears. And one innovation that he introduced to the government headquarters at number 10 Downing Street is the only thing that lasts, and that's Larry the cat. It was Cameron who brought the cat from an animal shelter to his official residence, and the goal was to curb the rat plague. The British media reported that Larry left 4 rival candidates behind him on the way to Downing Street. An employee named David was particularly fond of Larry. An acquaintance of the government employee once told Times Radio. The cat was taken because he was quiet and didn't care whether he was chosen or not, unlike other more needy cats who meowed and wanted attention. But Larry is still around, and his roommate is now called Rishi Sunak. For Rishi Sunak, domestic political calculations do count, though, and David Cameron represents the wealthy middle class who turned their backs on the Tories under Boris Johnson. Sunak must bring these lost core voters back for the next election, after Johnson's fall put an end to the Tories' Brexit opening to broader sections of the electorate. But for the populist conservative right, which has been at loggerheads with the party since Johnson's fall, Cameron is an irritant, and his comeback is a declaration of war, so to speak. David Cameron opposed Brexit as Prime Minister. He stood for friendship with China and later continued this with private lobbying. Even this year, and what our former Chancellor Schröder's with Gazprom, the Chinese infrastructure initiative New Silk Road is to Cameron. And there are political explosives lurking there. As Foreign Secretary, Cameron will represent either the opposite of his previous beliefs or the opposite of current government policy in 2 key policy areas. In no case does this give him political stature, and ultimately not the Sunak government either. So this will be a very interesting time. And if you want to know more right now, the next video is right in the end screen. I'll see you there. I'll be back.